Since the inception of this country, indifference has been normal. Inequity and unequal opportunity, normal. Self-interest and unfulfilled promises, normal. Injustice and racism, normal. But the murder of George Floyd brought the largest uprising in American history. Normal is no more. People are striving to reclaim their autonomy like never before. Today's audiences are conscious consumers, racially conscious, brand conscious. Now more than ever, we have the opportunity to change transactions into transformation. The new normal is possibility. Never Whisper Justice, an impact-first media company, produced the award-winning documentary film Black Boys, partnered with P&G to address the systematic bias ingrained in America's culture.
These young people don't need saviors, they need believers. Once you believe in them, then everything else will shift and change as a result.
With P&G already addressing the country with honest campaigns, the partnership was an easy fit. Black Boys' recognition was immediate, and the film was picked up to stream on NBC Peacock for the entire country to see. But that wasn't enough. Together, we teamed up with the NFL to host screenings of Black Boys with community members and NFL guests. Then, we created custom story stretches of each NFL player's experience with the film and distributed them through P&G's social channels, creating over 2 billion impressions and adding over $500 million of media value, as well as gathering thousands of likes and comments on social media and getting the attention through the news. Most brands would claim this is an accomplishment, but we are no longer doing what's normal. We are not stopping at starting a conversation. We are committed to changing it. Next, we team up with Old Spice and announce a social impact initiative to increase graduation rates for Black and brown young men by 2030. Our goal became to inspire tangible outcomes between students and teachers, so we utilize our in-house video-centric online learning management system, Frontlines of Justice. We broke down the entire Black Boys film into episodes and modules to engage students in micro-content that's educational and compelling. Each episode is supported by accredited academic research and lesson plans crafted by experienced teachers to make each exercise a unique and relevant learning experience. We implemented the Black Boys course at the epicenter of this very movement, Minneapolis Public Schools, and we did it for free. Never Whisper Justice and P&G are challenging the status quo by realizing it no longer exists. We've joined the wave of transformation. Instead of marketing our way and pretending to be a part of it, we are a conduit to the community, helping brands elevate mosaics of culture they have not been able to access before. Normal is over. When everything is changing, everything can be changed. Now, extraordinary begins.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Proudfoot. I'm a documentary filmmaker and the CEO of Breakwater Studios, and it's my pleasure to bring the team behind the feature documentary Black Boys together today to discuss how the film came to be and the incredible brand partnership that brought it to life. I'd like everybody to just introduce themselves here to start off, and we'll start with you, JT.
All right, my name is John Thomas, or JT Royston. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Never Whisper Justice. Specifically, I focus on everything involving original content, operations, amplification, and social impact, most importantly.
Wonderful. Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily. I am the head of partnerships at Never Whisper Justice. So I work closely with JT and the team and partners like Juan to figure out a way to both build partnerships that boost our viewership of the stories that we tell, but most importantly, also accelerate the impact of the initiatives we have that run alongside the films.
And Juan?
My name is Juan. I lead our communications on Old Spice at P&G, and I have the pleasure of also co-leading our social impact efforts.
Fantastic. So I have to ask, just as a filmmaker, how did this film begin? What was the kernel of the idea? How did it all start?
So the film really began for me, I would say, or my entry point, a little bit more about me. I was a military brat. I was born in Texas, moved to Germany, moved to Hawaii, and grew up mostly in the Southern California area. And during that time, I went to school, felt like I wanted to get into advertising, and I was shortly after, very interested in, figuring out what service looked like for myself, specifically what it looked like for my community as well. And I was at an agency in West Hollywood who sent me to a speaking engagement in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the time. And while I was there to present on something pretty general like email marketing, online advertising. And in addition to doing that, I had the chance to listen to other speakers. But one of the speakers specifically was speaking about her previous film about modern day school segregation that was picked up by Ava DuVernay, syndicated through Netflix, and her most recent film about the centering of the experiences of young Black men in America at the intersection of sports, mass incarceration, and education. And I turned to her and I was saying, "Hey, you're doing something that's way cooler than what I'm doing. I would love to talk to you." So from there, that actually was a conversation with the director, Sonia Lohman. She had put together an amazing team of educators, activists, and filmmakers. And I really came in from a more business perspective, really creating their impact as a vehicle for the change that we wanted to see. And that was such an important experience for me personally, because I felt like, similar to what I had mentioned, I grew up in all of these really cool areas, but oftentimes I didn't necessarily see the brilliance of my identity reflected at me. Oftentimes I saw a window into success and opportunity, and in a way that didn't necessarily make me feel like I was a part of the community. And for the first time, when I was on the sets of Black Boys, I had the opportunity to really have that brilliance reflected at me in the form of conversations with Carmelo Anthony, Malcolm Jenkins, Senator or former Secretary of Education John B. King under Obama. These people that I felt like really had a strong sense of who they were and really defined what community was for me. And that inspiration really challenged me to say, hey, this makes me feel seen, but what does it mean to create something for like others as well? And so in addition to Black Boys, that's really around the same time where we launched Never Whisper Justice, which is a social justice documentary filmmaking company, focuses on making those communities for every identity feel safe, seen, and then also kind of intensify that as well.
Fantastic. So tell me, what was the story that you wanted to tell, your team wanted to tell with this film?
That's a great question. The story that our team wanted to tell was specifically wanting to, allow Black men and Black boys who oftentimes, like, we don't necessarily have the safety of being able to find our identities in a world that loves us, or in a world that allows us to tap into the multi-dimensional nature of like who we are. And so what we wanted to do is hear strictly from Black men, from Black boys, about what it is that they need and who it is that they are. Because oftentimes our stories are synthesized through a majority white lens, or they become characterized or caricaturized, that is such a word, a lot of syllables, in a way that like doesn't show or reveal our deep and authentic humanity. And so what we wanted to do is kind of cut through that lens and be able to authentically have a portrayal of who it is we are and the ways in which we can create safe places through our identity exploration for Black men and boys nationwide.
So, Jawan, what were some things that you were thinking about on the brand side and working on the brand side that aligned so well with this project?
Yeah, thank you. So, first of all, thank you all for allowing us the opportunity to be here to share a little bit about this work. It's very special, so thank you for that. I'll say, first, I do want to reground in, I think we talked about this before, but this was really a partnership that was a perfect match at the perfect time, right? And a little bit about what I mean by that is, a lot of people have known Old Spice as a brand that has helped guys transition from adolescence for a while, right? We do that by providing superior products that help him look and feel his best. At the same time, we also want to make sure that we continue to help young people in a way that is meaningful. And by that, how do we continue to help young people discover and unleash their confidence and their true potential, which is really how we landed on our social impact efforts, which is to help increase high school graduation rates over the next 10 years by 10%. We know that, through our partners who are experts at this work in the fields of education, that studies show that, 1 in 3 young people do not have a mentor today. However, having a mentor, a young person, is 95% more likely to graduate from high school, actually. And so recognizing this, Old Spice, with partners like Never Whisper Justice, our partners Walmart, as well as Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, launched what we call the School of Swagger, which is a platform that ensures no young person drops out of high school due to a lack of confidence or mentorship through personal and academic positive relationship development. And look, the reality is, again, we've known through the research, is that when we double down into Black and Brown communities, we know that Black and Brown young people drop out of high school at a disproportionate rate, and that these communities are impacted by socioeconomic conditions that contribute to these dropouts. And so that kind of comes into play with the message that you just heard from JT, is, our work collaborating on this film has been deeply impactful. It's been special, but it's also been extremely exciting. We know that, the nature of this film, when brought to us, was really to celebrate the full spectrum and the full humanity of young Black and Brown boys, as well as Black and Brown men. And so this was a perfect opportunity to pair with our work, which is really rooted in the belief that all young people have the potential to not only change their own lives, but also to change the world. And the way in which we do that is by showing and telling these types of stories.
It's a beautiful mission. And I think this project does just that. Emily, can you talk about, the specific, I know there's a lot of different things, not only those, who have watched the film, who are impacted by it, but I know there's some other programs, educational initiatives, et cetera, that you guys have undertaken. Can you talk about the different ways that the film has made its impact, in particular in partnership with Old Spice?
Yeah, just from a personal perspective, that is exactly why I joined Never Whisper Justice, which is about what their whole, I just joined in November, but our whole framework and lens about how we go about telling stories and creating impact. Obviously, the concept of using storytelling to drive change in the world isn't necessarily new, but it's a really tricky link of how do you tell the story and get someone who just watched it to go and do something about it. So what attracted me most to Never Whisper Justice and to call up JT and be like, can I work with you in some capacity? And then ultimately coming on board to head their partnerships is the connection between the storytelling studio and what we call what is called Front Lines of Justice, our ability, our learning management system to take the film Black Boys and our content slate of future films throughout the rest of the year and figure out a way to modularize them, to cut up the film in a way that can wrap curriculum, get it into the classrooms across the country. How do we take the message of the film Black Boys and get it in front of students? How do we get teachers to not only show it to their students, but actually know how to educate around it and make it genuinely impactful? And then on top of just the internal initiatives that Never Whisper Justice does with our learning management system, how do we build relationships with incredible brands like Old Spice, who has their already established initiatives like the School of Swagger program that Juwan just mentioned, and align it with the film to even accelerate that impact even further. So I know I'm relatively new and joining in November, but as we take the lens of what is our framework, what is our approach to building partners and really building these relationships with brands under P&G specifically, which already has incredible initiatives in place of how do we integrate the story, but most importantly, how do we get into the classroom or the boardroom, and how do we really drive the initiative to make sure that Jawan's teams and their needs and what they care most about, which is driving mentorship and graduation rates, is also met. So that's what, I mean, just from a personal perspective, felt so unique. And then I'll say one last thing. I think in the context of brand storytelling, this film feels really uniquely positioned. Obviously, there's incredible brand-funded films in the virtual library, obviously in part of the festival, many of which are impact-driven. But I think the way that the partnership was built between Never Whisper Justice and Old Spice is so unique in the way that the story, the integrity of the story is maintained and the impact is just as strong, is a difficult balance, and one that I think was executed so beautifully. So I just will say that.
Yeah. No, I think I would love to follow up on that balance, because I do think it's really well achieved in this film, and I'm curious about that, how you achieved that. But first, I just wanted to ask a question. You know, from a filmmaking side, you know, one of the challenges with a film like this is trying to balance like big, large social issues with how we connect to individual people through emotion and storytelling. How did you balance it? And can you talk a little bit about, from the filmmaking side, how you and the director structured the film to balance those sort of macro and micro stories?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question, and I wouldn't expect anything less from an amazing filmmaker. So shout out to you, Ben. So what we did specifically is, you know, when it comes to building relationships with the voices of the film, we wanted to make sure that there wasn't an instance where you just see one person and it's like you don't know why they're there. And so if in the chapters of body, mind, voice, and heart, you see these major through lines who are almost the heroes of their own individual chapters. And so on that, you then have their individual experiences accented by subject matter experts and people who are speaking to their experiences that are being played out in real life in a more deeper way. And so I felt like that was the way in which we were able to kind of build that relationship, but make it kind of naturally flow and progress. And it was something that it took a lot of work. I will say that I would wish that we said that we had that rationale going in. I think we kind of found it, and and I think that's also when it comes to you know, the messiness of like justice work in particular. Sometimes like these stories aren't linear, neither is healing, you know? And so how are we able to make almost like this non-linear path of these stories, but still surrounded by the deep, rich impact that we were seeking to achieve?
Mm-hmm. I think that was really well handled, and the you know, hopefully everybody has seen the film, but I don't want to ruin it. But just the bookends, which are very intimate, I think really cinch the film in, and both are so well achieved. I thought that was really special about this project. In terms of the balance between, you know, talking about giving a filmmaker the freedom to tell the story they want to tell, versus sort of a brand having certain guidelines and a plan for the year, et cetera. You know, that's something that that's a sort of overarching conversation that we have, is like, how involved or how much space or how does the brand make sure that they get what they need to do, while at the same time allowing freedom for the filmmaker to tell their story. Juwan, we'll start with you. Like, how did you think about that, and how did you think about this in terms of like, you know, what you needed to achieve in terms of your KPI? Were you even thinking that way? Do you see this more as you know, something that's more within the mission and values, and less as like performant marketing? Can you talk a little bit about that, how you see this project?
Yeah, so I'll start with, you know, I do agree with you in that you know, I do think that for some companies, some organizations, it could be particularly difficult to try to understand how do you support certain groups, like, you know, Black and Brown folks, in a way that is meaningful, and that can be appreciated by that group. I think it's a few things. You know, some things are a matter of you know, should we do? And that's usually a yes or no. I think others are more importantly about how do you do it? And I think if you look across the spectrum of organizations, not even just companies, you can see examples of how it's done well and how it could have been done better. I think that's one. I think for two, for us, you asked about KPIs. Of course, a business is about business, but for us, it is the KPI rooted in that high school graduation, which is always our end objective. With any idea or project that comes in, the last question we always are going to have is that in support of our top line objective, which is in service of getting young people to graduate. And if it is, that's great. Then it's how we do it. And if it's not, then that kind of helps us discern where we should focus our resources, our time and energy, and our team's value at, so that we can make the greatest impact. I think that's two. And then three is, we do benefit from being an organization in our larger parent organization, Procter & Gamble, as being committed to this type of work for decades. I mentioned before that Old Spice for more than 80 years has been committed toward the confidence of young people and helping them develop that through our messaging and through the products that we provide. And so we are very principled in the manner that our attention is always focused on how do we best serve our consumer. And I think that how evolves over time. We've seen in the summer of 2020 a lot of the racial demonstrations and a wave of support around the world and solidarity that has shown that people are committed and they do want more of this work. They expect more of this work from businesses and from leaders in the community. And so for us, again, it became not if we should be doing this, but how do we do it in a way that is both impactful, but also meaningfully appreciated by that group as well.
Yeah. So here's a question, and it's sort of it's a personal question, I think, as well. You mentioned, a lot of companies, I think, especially in the past year and a half, starting in that summer of 2020, have wanted to say something, about race in America, and many companies have made content around this idea. And I think it's been largely hit and miss, right? As JT and Juan, as men of color, American men of color, can you talk personally about how you have taken in that content, and what is the way, what's the right way to do this? And specifically working on this project, what did you do, or how did you approach this project to do it in a way that you felt was authentic to your purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like one balance that we had to strike within even the creation of this film was that a lot of these concepts that are brought up for Black people, Black men, Black boys, they're not novel. And I feel like, summer of 2020, it was the first time that, this kind of entry-level conversation for the Black experience became more accessible, or at least even just more recognized rather than accessible, right? Because it's been very in our face for some years now. Yeah. And the balance with that was, really being able to say, what are the ways in which we can invite others into this conversation and allow them to both listen, and while listening, find the strength in their voice and their understanding of how they can kind of fit into the subject matter, right? How they can fit into these experiences, how they can show up as allies, and how they can like root themselves in their own identities while supporting like us specifically. And I felt like that was, a relatively nuanced task. I think that, a lot of the partners that we work with outside of Old Spice, they're a little bit worried about how do they find themselves in the conversation? How do they take a stance? They're worried about brand sensitivity. They're worried about the ways in which, they feel like they might get canceled if they do something wrong. And so I feel like, what we really wanted to do with this film is create a level playing field, which was, by us, for us, but at the same time, like gave place for allies and gave space for allies as well, you know. And so I felt like that's something that we worked to do. It was definitely quite the balance, but I feel like it's something we did effectively. And, you know, the last thing I'll say is, you know, Black men and boys, we're very much aware of our humanity. You know, we didn't need a film to humanize us for us, you know, like we use this as a vehicle or almost like a letter to the community to love us in the way in which we love ourselves.
Yeah, I'll build a little bit off of what JT said. I think that was, you know, beautifully said, JT. I think what I'll add is, you know, I mentioned earlier that the partnership was special. And one of the reasons why I said that, you know, personally is because, you know, even when I look at the film and I look at our work even now, right, and the work that has evolved since the film initially was created, I do see myself, right? And so I do think that goes into play. And I think also what I see is hope and inspiration. And I think that in terms of, you know, how you get people to act and how do you motivate people to act is really important. And so, you know, I think it was already mentioned, but, you know, even before the summer of 2020, it's not the first time that these incidents have happened, right? It's not the first time that, you know, a young Black and brown person, even myself, would have experienced some type of aggression or some type of reality that reminds you of the color of your skin. And so, you know, I think that what that does is it puts us in a position, especially, you know, being at Old Spice and doing the work that we're doing, it puts you in a position where you can then figure out, well, how can I be part of that change? And what is my role in terms of that change? And it is doing this type of work. And it's doing so with deep passion. It's finding ways to make it authentic and meaningful. And at the end of the day, you know, we're going to do something and it's about doing it. Because that's what your consumers want to see. That's what people want to see, is not only that you're talking about doing something, you're giving lip service, they're also putting your action, you know, where what you're saying, and that you're showing progress over time, which is why, you know, you mentioned the KPIs, and that is our KPI. The KPI for the program is exactly what we said. And, you know, we track, you know, that work through different measures and different partners, but it's mostly at the end of the day about doing exactly what you said you would do.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a really interesting evolution that's happened, I think, really largely over the last, you know, 3-4 years, where, you know, large organizations that are legally bound by fiduciary duty, right, the requirement to make money, are also, you know, lifting up other important values that are just as, if not more important, than simply the bottom line. And you know, just what you had said about, you know, your KPI being the graduation rate, and Never Whisper Justice's, you know, modus operandi being specifically about making films and partnering with brands to tell social justice stories. Can you talk about sort of what you're seeing historically here in, you know, really in sort of capitalism, how there's elements of social responsibility that are rising up and competing, and in some cases winning, in terms of what's the most important value that we should pursue?
Emily, please tell your 1950s story.
Okay,
We got to hear the 1950s story, please, Emily.
It's probably not an original story, but JT and I we talk a lot about a lot. And over the last few weeks, we've talked a lot about legacy and what brands' legacies are. And if you type into Google image right now, 1950s advertising, what pops up is kind of disturbing in terms of how, I mean, the first few results are a lot about women's place in culture, as kind of in the kitchen or as like a service, not to mention the representation of who is in these ads is obviously very limited from the 1950s. And it's just, we talk a lot about, we don't think brands create culture, but they definitely have a huge platform and megaphone to impact culture and to inform culture. And it's up to the brand to decide, knowing they have this huge megaphone, all of these resources and this big platform, is how are we going to impact? Is it going to be in a good way, or in what could be a bad way. And in 50 years from now, if you Google, it's probably gonna be some other engine, but if you Google 50 years from now, advertising 2022 or branded content 2022, what is your brand's legacy? What were you talking about? Who are you featuring? What stories were you telling? So JT and I talk a lot about that. I know just in my previous work, I've spent the last more than a decade in advertising, specifically the last 5 years, more so in film. But I mean, a lot of companies, even prior to 2020, were really working with the term double bottom line. What is our bottom line to sell product or services, whatever it might be, but our double bottom line is what impact are we actually driving? Not a ton of companies operate with that mindset, but obviously companies like Old Spice have a double bottom line of what are we selling, but also what is the impact and where do we play, not just the most authentically, but where can we really make the most impact? And Juwan was talking a ton of about the how, which was incredible. And it's also the why of Old Spice, of like, how does this ladder back up to Old Spice's mission and values of impacting communities and in different stages of life. And so as long as, in our framework of how we work with brands is really talking to them about what's your why and what industry do you work in and how can you impact that sector the most. And maybe it's not necessarily tied to what they're selling or the services they provide. It might be more of a personal connection. It can vary. But that's the 1950s story that JT was referring to. But it's really kind of a framework and a lens we're taking as we talk to more and more partners who want to come on board and help us accelerate the impact. And just tapping back to what we were talking about prior and how the film necessarily isn't meant to be, it's really meant to be an invite to join the conversation. And I even think that's a line in the film of join the conversation. And that's extended to brands and consumers alike, or anyone who watches the film, so any human or citizen. So I think the way we are building our or start conversations about potential partnerships is always taken with that lens of how, to Juwan's point of how are you actually going tactically and why? Why are we doing this? So I'll end there.
Great. So a question, Juwan. So obviously there's so many different ways to try to achieve that, increase in graduation rate. Why a film and why a documentary feature film?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll start out by saying there's several different activities, if you will, that we have in order to help with our social impact efforts. So one of those is producing excellent content, which is not something that is foreign to a brand like Old Spice. In the more branded world, we work with partners that are amazing at what they do. To create really amazing pieces of content, both short and long form. And we allow our consumers to experience that. We're a brand that, in the core is all about humor and comedy. And so when we look at this work here for this documentary, again, it's in our wheelhouse of high quality, excellent, content that speaks to work that we're doing, which is also rooted in our brand equity, which is helping guys build true confidence. We've been doing that for a while now. And so it really kind of checked all of the boxes in terms of why Old Spice, I think is another question that folks could have. Why would you do work like this? And the truth of the matter is because it's rooted in who we are as a brand. And it helps illuminate the work that we're doing through amazing content that we can share with our consumers, right? I think second is how do you scale up your impact, right? So you've kind of got something going and how do you scale that up? And, again, for us, it's working with partners like Never Wish for Justice and, several other partners that we have on, how can you help continue to bring this to life for us? And, Walmart is a great example of that and seeing this work and going, wow, like that is a great example of grassroots, meaningful, social impact work from a brand that's deeply committed, and it makes sense, right? We took the work, I think Emily and JT mentioned it earlier, we took the work and partnered it with some of our players that we work with and did high school tours around the country, which were one-on-one sessions that were with high school students, right? So Black and brown guys who would watch the film to then facilitate and inspire these conversations on, how did that make you feel? What thoughts do you have? And how do you feel as though this has changed your mindset on how you look at yourself, right? And so through that, again, talking about mentorship between teacher and student and counselor and student, we are creating those positive relationships to talk about these issues in the classroom that may not have been talked about, right? Or is the elephant in the room, or not something that these students feel as though they could have addressed. And so understanding how you could scale that impact to reach more people, to impact more students is also, important here as well. And it's something that we did and it worked really well for us, which is why, again, the partnership couldn't have been better. And the partners that we work with, like, your Walmart and Big Brothers, Big Sisters of America, have made it, even more special.
So here's one thing that I think is really interesting about this project, and I think it's a trend, and it's something that I've seen evolve over the last few years. Is, we have a big brand, right, like Old Spice, and we have filmmakers, and they're talking directly to each other, and that is a relatively new situation. Emily, you said that you had come from a decade in the advertising world, and we're kind of all aware of the hierarchy of brands and agencies and, production companies and directors and how that all has worked traditionally. But we're seeing a disintegration of that whole system, especially when it comes to documentary films, and especially when it comes to documentary films that deal with social justice, because those are things, those are matters of the heart. They're highly personal, and it's not something that necessarily can organically or authentically come from a highly tactical situation that like an agency is used to doing. So I think there's something beautiful happening here, which is the disintermediation of the traditional advertising hierarchy, where we have the filmmaker and the brand talking to each other, sharing their goals. Can you talk about how that worked and how that affected the film and this initiative?
Absolutely. So I'll add first before the group adds. The way that we think about it, there is no hierarchy. Number one, I'll say that. There have been times where for this work, I know that myself and some of our other leaders will call the school district directly with the relationships that we have and say, hey, like, how are things going, right? What is your number one challenge right now with students in your district, and how can we help with that? And I think that when you remove some of the barriers, particularly to communication, you discover a lot of really valuable insights, right? You also get a better working relationship, and you get better work, right? The output is great. And so I think for here that is mirrored, right? In that we are talking directly, we are sharing things back and forth, we're sharing ideas or things that are happening, and JT and we are giving us updates with the film and how it continues to still dominate conversation and inspire these type of dialogues. And that is what really makes the partnership special, right? And so whether it is, us working with any of our other resources or Never Whisper Justice and our agencies and other partners, we really try to level the playing field and motivate not only our team members and the team that works on this work, to empower them to go and do the action and make the connections and build relationships. Because at the end of the day, we know that the work will benefit from that. And again, that KPI, the objective, the students will benefit from it. These young people will benefit from it and be better off because of that.
On the Never Whisper Justice side, what was it like working directly with Juwan and his team, directly with the brand? And Emily, from your perspective, coming from advertising, how did that help the project?
JT, I'll let you start.
So to kind of backtrack to a little bit of, there's like a really interesting ethos question that you're asking, Ben, in regards to, how can a brand and filmmakers like coexist for impact without kind of stepping on each other's toes, so to speak, or, still being able to be rooted in the same things. And I think, Juwan did a phenomenal job of saying, the KPI is impact, but it's also I think, one of my mentors said something to the effect of, business is a vehicle, but like, what is it a vehicle to? And so I think that for us, the reason why this partnership works so well is because we were using business as a vehicle towards liberation for others. And that was simply it. So anything else that was coming into conflict with that was noise. And additionally, we did structure our agreements in a way to where there was opportunities for the brands to be more brand forward in the form of story stretches, like Joanne mentioned, with NFL players who are talking to kids and sharing these conversations, not being repurposed and remarketed and being more brand forward. But then there was also the element of a certain level of I would say purity, like within the film as well. And I think that us being able to know what it is that we were wanting to come in and accomplish, it made it so much easier to interact. And so shout out to the Old Spice team, because it was such a pleasure. And honestly, we wouldn't have had the same amount of impact had we not partnered in this way.
Yeah, it's great.
I came in, unfortunately, after the film had completed, and I just joined in November. But from my unique standpoint, the beauty of making a film together is it has legs. It's not just a 30-second TV spot that when the advertising buy is over is off the air. We have the ability to grow this partnership long term. None of our partnerships are a one-off. It's really meant to, how can we build this? How can we accelerate the School of Swagger initiative and take it across the country and beyond? How can we get into more classrooms than the ones we're already in? There's always more work to be done. So from my standpoint of being on the film side and figuring out the best way to work with a brand is, again, to JT's point, we actually have to have a shared goal here and articulate that shared goal up top. And then from my standpoint is, okay, how do we not just meet that goal, but build on it year after year? So I think that also just ties back to your prior question of why film and what is different about film. And one more note on that is that it's not necessarily always, you would think it might be a marketing team or always the advertising team within a brand that wants to make a film. But the beauty is Joanne works cross-functionally on the impact side at Old Spice. And a lot of companies are developing impact dedicated teams. And we're talking to a variety of different teams who really want to get involved in filmmaking. So I think that's also kind of a unique way to not just create change, but also tell a story and have a brand really impact certain areas.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that I have seen that, I think, again and again in the most successful partnerships. And this is certainly among those where you have someone like Juwan on the brand side, his task is not to sell as many units of deodorant as possible, right? And because there's a larger and higher mission happening, you guys can kind of join hands there in the overall mission, and that is what makes the film feel like a film and not like an advertisement. And I hope everybody watching this takes the time and watches the film. It's a powerful documentary. It's both challenging and inspiring, and is a really welcoming conversation, and you learn a lot. I learned a lot watching it. Anything else that congratulations, I should say. Is there anything else that the team would like to add in before we wrap this up?
Well, I wouldn't be, I wouldn't be full complete story if we didn't use this as a way to, for our viewers to learn more about the work and also learn how you can volunteer in your local community. So I have to put the plug out there, Ben, JT, and Emily, to learn more about the Old Spice School of Swagger and all of the work that we've done to date. You could visit our webpage, which is on walmart.com/School of Swagger. Learn about how you can volunteer in your local community and help them graduate tomorrow.
Love that. JT?
Additionally, I'll throw in a little plug. If you're interested in checking out our initiative, that's specifically around how we took the Black Boys curriculum, broke it down into episodes and modules, And we're actually working to provide it to 193,000 students, 7,000 teachers, 400 districts. Go to frontlinesofjustice.com/Black Boys. There's a lot of amazing information there, and I'm excited to continue the conversation with our partners, with Old Spice and our other brand partners as well.
Fantastic. Well, I hope everybody takes the opportunity to watch the film Black Boys, check out the School of Swagger, check out Never Whisper Justice, and see what amazing work these folks are doing, not just in the filmmaking side of things, but making real change in this country. So thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.